Hi, everyone. Happy Friday and welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about the marriage based green card interview. Everything you need to know about it, how to prepare, and what type of questions to expect in these interviews. All right. We're going to be talking about people applying for a green card in the US and at the embassy. So, we're going to cover everyone basically doing a marriage based green card application. So, if this is your first time joining me, I am Lillian Chukura. I am an immigration lawyer based in Worcester, Massachusetts, and my firm, Lily Legal, helps individuals and families get green cards in the US using the US immigration law system. If that sounds interesting to you, if you want to know more about getting a green card, preparing for the process, or getting citizenship, feel free to subscribe to this channel, like this video. If you want to see if you or a family member qualifies for a green card or citizenship, feel free to reach out and schedule a strategy session with me. You can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, or by going to my page, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788. All my contact information is always in the description to this video. So let's get started. All right. What do you need to know if you have a marriage based green card application and you have an interview coming up? Well, hopefully, hopefully you watch my other videos on what you need to include in your application so that you have a strong application. Okay. If you are in the US and your spouse is in the US and you're applying for a green card, please, please watch my video on getting your interview waived. Okay. If your spouse is not in the US, you can't get your interview waived. All right. But if your spouse is in the US and is applying for the green card in the US, watch that video because I talk about how you can skip this whole process, right? How you can make your application so good that you can skip the whole interview process. So, if you are not able to skip the interview process, then this video is for you. All right. So, first thing first, make sure, right? Make sure that you have all the documents that is required for your interview. Because if you get to the interview and you don't have a required document, it will delay your processing. So let's start with people that are outside of the US going to the embassy for an interview because this is the most straightforward interview process because only the foreign spouse that's in the country is required to go to the interview at the embassy. So if you are a US citizen and you're filing for your spouse is not in the US, you, the US citizen or permanent resident, do not have to go to the interview, right? Sometimes you want to, and you just happen to be in the country at the same time that the interview is scheduled. So you go with your spouse to the embassy for the interview. But just know, as the US citizen or permanent resident filing for a spouse that's outside of the US, you do not have to go to the interview. Your spouse, your spouse that lives outside of the US, does have to go to the interview. Now, once the interview is scheduled, the next steps are your spouse needs to do their medical exam. If their police certificate is over a year old, they need to get a new one. So those are the once you have your interview dates, those are the two things you have to do next, right? Those are the two things your spouse has to do next. They have to first look at they have to schedule the medical exam because again, there's only specific medical doctors in each country that can do these exams. So you need to know the appropriate one for your embassy and go to that person. Okay. Do not go to your local physician and think that they do a physical and that's it. No, 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 no. It has to be a physician that's designated by the US Embassy to do these exams. All right. So you go and your spouse goes and does their physical and make sure they have their vaccinations. Okay. They need all their required vaccinations. And if they don't have it, they can get it at that appointment. Then they should also look at their police certificate. Because when you are at the MVC stage, the National Visa Center stage, and you uploaded all your documents, that police certificate is included in that. If it took a year or two for your interview to be scheduled, that means you're going to need a new police certificate for your interview because those are only good for 1 year. So make sure you do not miss that part. Check your police certificate. All right. And then once you have all of those, you are now ready to actually focus on the interview itself. This is how the interview goes. You get there, you check in, the officer calls you in, and most of the time at the embassy, it's not like a private office, it's like a cubicle, right? And they ask you questions. Now, the questions the officer are going to ask you, the foreign spouse of a US citizen or permanent resident, is going to be about yourself because they have to make sure that you are the person that applied for this visa, right? That applied for this green card. And then they're going to ask you questions to make sure that you qualify for a green card. Like if you have ever applied for a visa before and there's information that's different between the two applications, they're going to ask you about that, right? If your names are different, they're going to ask you about that. So if you changed your name when you got married, just make sure that you, if your country requires you to do a separate name change thing, make sure that you have that documentation. Once they finish all of that, they will start asking you questions about your spouse and your life together, right? When was the last time you saw your spouse? When was the last time they traveled to your country? When was the last time you two spoke on the phone? How often do you speak on the phone? Do you, do they send you money? What do they do for a living? They are asking you these questions, especially the what do they do for a living? What are their parents' names? Do they have any friends? Right? If they ask you what does your spouse do for a living, you need to know because the officer knows. Okay. How does the officer know this? It's in your application. When your spouse filed for you, they put the name of where they work, their job title, and how long they've been working there. That is in their application. In the I-130, it asks that. So if you don't know where your spouse works, how long they've been working there, where they live, how long they've been living there. So listen, I live in a town called Worcester, Massachusetts. Everyone pronounces it Worcester because they could not understand how you get Worcester from the spelling of how it's actually spelled, right? So if you're not from here, if you've never talked to someone from here, you will look at it and say Worcester. The officer knows this. So if you, the spouse, are over there calling Worcester, please don't. Right? You need to, if you're talking to your spouse and they're telling you, oh, I went to this place in Worcester, and then you get to the interview and you're saying Worcester, that's a problem, right? Because that means, how are you talking to your spouse and you're pronouncing where they live wrong, right? So those are the things to keep in mind. Those are the little things to keep in mind. Most of the time, the interviews are not like 10 hours long. They are not. At the embassy, because they're only asking questions to one spouse. If both spouses show up, they may let the US citizen or permanent resident in, they may ask them questions, but they're not required to. So sometimes I've seen situations where the US citizen or permanent resident spouse goes over there for the interview and the officer doesn't even let them come in. They just talk to the foreign spouse and get everything done and move it right along. So, your presence as the US citizen or permanent resident filing for your spouse is not required at the embassy. It can be a bonus if you're able to go, right? But if you are going, you need to be prepared as well. You will be asked, you may be asked the same type of questions about your spouse. So you have to be sure before you go that that's something that's going to help your case and not hurt your case. All right. So that is the interview process for people outside of the US. Once the officer makes a decision, they are making a decision based on the answers you've given. They're going to check off, yes, you qualify for a visa, right? You don't need a waiver. You don't have anything in your background that stops you from qualifying for a visa. Then they're going to look at, is your marriage real? Right? Do we have enough here to say that this marriage is real? Then they check off all of those. Now, what documents do you take? They give you a list. So you should be taking originals of your marriage certificate, birth certificate, passport, everything that's on the list. You should be taking to the interview with you. Additional things you should be taking to the interview with you is any additional evidence you have that was not included in your initial filing. So, for example, if you never included your WhatsApp communication and you have like 200 pages of WhatsApp chat between you and your spouse, and you never included that, go ahead, print it out, take it with you to the interview. If you never included pictures in your initial filing, go ahead, print that out and take it with you to the interview. Okay, those are things that matters. Quick story. So when we were applying for our visa to the US, we went to the interview. The officer was like, "Oh, let's see pictures." My mom gave them pictures of herself and my dad. The officer got upset and it's like, "No, I also want to see pictures of him with the children." Okay. So we had to have our interview rescheduled because we did not have pictures of us, the children, and our father that's in the US. That's the only reason the interview was rescheduled. Everything else we had except for those pictures. We come back to the interview for the rescheduled interview. The next officer is like, "Oh, I'm not sure why your interview was rescheduled." Looks over the application and is like, "My mom, we had albums, like albums on top of albums of pictures of all of us together." The second officer at the interview, did not even look at those. They did not look at the albums and albums that we had. They just looked over the application and approved it. So do not think that just because someone else went to their interview and didn't need to take pictures with them, that you're not going to need to take pictures with you, because officers are different. Okay, one officer may put a lot of weight on those pictures and another officer will not put any weight to it. So bring as much documentation of your relationship as possible. Even the things you're like, "Oh, but who wants to see these WhatsApp communication?" Your officer that day may want to see them. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I'm going to I'm going to now move forward with people that are in the US. You filed your application, your spouse is also in the US, they came in with a visa, you can do the whole process in the US. You have your visa, your green card interview scheduled. How do you prepare? One, if you did not include your medical exam in the initial filing, go ahead, get your medical done, because you're going to need it for the interview. Please, please, please do not open that medical exam report, because once you open it, it's void. You have to get another one. Okay, it's sealed for a reason. You can ask them, the physician for a copy for your records, but the one they gave you in the sealed envelope needs to stay sealed. Okay. Now, as far as documentation, again, the interview notice will tell you what documents they want you to bring, what type of documents. So, of course, your marriage certificate, birth certificates, proof of identity, so passport. If you have children together, birth certificates for the children. Again, you want to stack your stuff. You need to have, if you have a joint bank account, for example, please do not just put one statement. Okay, you need, let's say you've had your joint bank account for 2 years. My recommendation, right? Tips and tricks. That's what we're talking about here. The tip is include all of them, all 2 years of bank statements. Because when you just include one bank statement just to show that you have a joint account, that doesn't tell the officer anything. It doesn't tell the officer anything. But if you have 2 years of bank statements showing that every single month your rent, your utilities, your groceries, everything, right? Your car insurance is coming out of that bank account. Your income is going into that bank account. That's what the officer wants to see. So if you have bank statements and the only thing, and you never use the bank account, that's not helpful for your case. I always say this because everyone thinks you must have a joint bank account. It's not a must. If you do not use the account, please, please do not include the statements, because the officer is going to look at the fact that you've had the account for 2 years and you have zero transactions, your rent, your groceries, nothing comes out of that account. It's not helpful. It doesn't prove anything to the officer, right? You should be having documentation showing cohabitation. If you're in the US with your spouse, you have to show that you and your spouse are living together. You have to show that you and your spouse are living together. So, leases together, mortgage, things like that. And then there are situations where a couple is living with, their in-laws, or they are living with a sibling and they don't have a lease. And if that's the situation, then a statement from the person that you're living with saying that you two are living there is good. Okay. It shows that, one, you're actually living there, right? Because the statements are notarized and those statements are under, like, basically you are swearing that everything you're telling the officer, everything you're giving to USCIS is true. So they're going to take it as that. But if the statement is not notarized, that's another tip. If the statement is not notarized, it's not going to count. Okay, because the officer has no way to know if the person that signed it is actually the real person, or if you're just giving them a document that you came up with and you signed. So it's really, really important that if you are going to include affidavits, for, where you're living, or for family members or friends that are saying, testifying that your marriage is real and they have seen you to build a life together. If you are going to be including those affidavits, please, please, please make sure, that they are notarized, because they are going to be useless if they are not notarized. The officer is not going to, give it any weight if they're not notarized, because they're not sure if it's the real person that wrote them. So keep that in mind. You should, as far as the interview is concerned, on the day of the interview, please show up on time. Don't show up like an hour before your interview, but at least 15 minutes before your interview, because you want to make sure if there's parking issues, if there's, if you have to park further away and walk a few blocks to your interview, that you have enough time for that and you're not coming into the building all like, I'm in a rush, right? You want to know that you have enough time to sit down and wait for your number to be called. If you have an interview at 1 o'clock, you may not be called at 1 o'clock. You may be called at 1:30. So have some patience on that as well. So show up on time, be ready for your to go. And if the officer is a few minutes behind, just know you may not be called at the time that your interview is actually scheduled. So that's something to keep in mind, and just have patience. Okay? Patience. Um, and then as far as how to dress to the interview, please dress appropriately, right? Not like you're going to church, but like but not like you're going to the club either. All right. The cutest the cutest thing I've seen so far at the interviews, please, you don't have to do this, it's just something that I saw that was so cute, was a couple. I think they're from an African country. I didn't ask, but I went to the interview with my clients, and this couple were dressed in like matching outfits for the interview. And I found it so cute because guess what? That is normal, right? When we are going to to parties or events that are important, most African couples will wear the same, will match their outfits, right? They won't be completely like opposites. So it was just something that I thought was so cute. If that is not you, that is not you, right? Don't go in there and wear matching outfits if that's not something you normally would do. Please, please. It's just something that was cute. And then when you get into your interview, the officer may interview you together or separately. Do not freak out if they interview you separately. That's what the preparation is all about, right? Now, what type of questions they will ask you is going to be a little different from someone that is going to the embassy for an interview, because both of you are there now. They can compare your answers to the question, and both of you live in the US, so you should know more about each other since you're living in the same household, right? So that's really what they look at there. They're looking to ask you questions about your day-to-day life, right? Where does your spouse work? Who are their, how did you meet? How did you meet? Who proposed to whom? When did you know, when was the proposal? How did the proposal happen, right? Was it just the two of you? Did you do an elaborate proposal? What was your wedding like? Was it just the two of you? Or did you have an elaborate wedding? All of those things they will ask you, right? Some officers don't really care. As far as the wedding, if you do an elaborate wedding, go ahead and get the pictures. Include the pictures, because that's a whole that's a lot of money that you spend. So you might as well make sure that you have all the pictures for the officer to see how much money y'all spent on the wedding. Again, you don't need to spend money on the wedding, but if you do, it is a good thing to document that. All right. And then if you have your wedding at City Hall, courthouse, that is perfectly fine. The officer does not care where you got married. They care that you are married, right? And that you two remember how you got married, that you two remember who was there, right? That you remember what you did after. It could just be that you did nothing, you went home. It could be that you met up with friends and had dinner. Perfectly fine. But if they're interviewing you separately, they're going to be comparing your answers to these questions. The next set of questions they will ask is going to be about your day-to-day life. Like, who wakes up first, right? If you have kids, who takes the kids to school, right? If, what kind of car do you drive? What kind of home do you live in? Apartment or a house, right? How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms in your bedroom, how many windows, how many doors, is there a closet? One of the questions that my local field officers love to ask is, if this office, right, if this office that you're in right now is your bedroom, where would everything be, right? Suppose the door is my door, my office door, where would everything else be? So you will have to be able to describe every single thing in your bedroom. Like, where are the windows? You said there were two windows. What walls would the windows be in compared, if you're walking in from this door? Where would the windows be? Where would the bed be? Where would the closet be? Do you have dressers? What wall will those be on? So those are all the things that you talk about when you're given that scenario of, if this is my bedroom, if this is your bedroom, where would everything be? Right? Do you have curtains on your walls? What type of couch do you have? What color is it? What kind of stove do you have? Gas or electric? Right? The things that you don't think about, especially if you are not the spouse that cooks, right? If you are not the spouse that cooks, you may need to just go in the kitchen and take a peek. Like, oh, okay, it's gas. Oh, okay, the walls are cream, right? Um, you know, those are things to really pay attention to. Pay attention to your home. That's really the trick there, is you need to pay attention to your home, because that's where people really mess up, is not knowing their own home. So pay attention. What type of floors do you have? I'll tell you this. I've had clients that went to an interview, and the officer was basically threatening to deny their case because they came to me after the interview. And basically, the officer was like, one spouse said the floors were tile and the other said it was wood. Now, was there actually a difference? No. Do you know what happened there? The floors are tile, but they look like wood. They're one of those tiles that look like wood, but they're actually tiles. So one spouse saw them and was like, "Oh, those are wood, right? They look like wood," and the other was like, "They're tiles." So it's those little things that, even if you mess up at the interview, you can easily explain it by just taking a picture of the floors. And guess what? That's what we did. Okay. We took a picture of the floors and sent it in, to help explain that to the officer, because they were just not understanding. How can you get that wrong if you live in the same household? Right. And then another thing was the question about, if this was your bedroom and the door was right there, where would everything be? Well, their bedroom has two doors, and one spouse explained it based on the door that they use the most. The other explained it from one door, and it just the officer didn't understand. How can you get it so wrong if you live in the same house and sleep in the same room? Well, there's two doors, and they were explaining it from two separate perspectives, because they were explaining it from two separate doors. So, again, pictures of the room from both doors shows exactly what they described is what the room looked like, depending on the door that you're coming in from. So, yeah, prepare for your interview. Prepare for the questions, because those little things, sometimes it's a cultural thing, and sometimes you just don't be knowing, right? And you just need to pay attention to your home a little bit. to prepare for this interview. And the cultural things can be explained. Um, I'll give you another example before we close out. A cultural thing is really US um, buildings versus African buildings or even European buildings. Because I will tell you this. I will tell you this. When I was growing up in Nigeria, um, the first floor, what we call the first floor in the US, is actually the ground floor. And what we call the second floor is actually the first floor. So I had a couple where that was the issue. They're like, oh, what floor do you live on? One spouse says the second floor, the other spouse says the first floor. What was the issue? It was a cultural issue where one spouse is saying, oh, this is this is this is what I consider the first floor from where, because of where I'm from. And the other one's like, well, this is the second floor because of that's how it's said in the US. So it was really a cultural issue, and not that these people did not live in the same house or that they did not understand each other, or they were trying to lie to the officer. Okay. All right, I have a question here, so let's cover the question before we go. I think your question got caught off at the end, Mikkel. So I know you have touched on the requirements for filing when married to a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, but I would like to know the difference in how the two applications are handled, specifically when married to a permanent resident. Scenario is that the foreign partner came in legally. What is the process and time frame? Oh, okay. So basically, he's asking if a spouse of a permanent resident came in with a visa, what is that process like? Right? How do they get their green card in the US? Short answer is, if they are in legal status currently, they can apply for a green card in the US. If they are not currently in legal status, they are not able to apply for a green card in the US because the spouse is a permanent resident. Once the spouse becomes a US citizen, that changes. They can apply for permanent residency green card inside the US. But because the spouse is a permanent resident, if they did not maintain their status, so let's say they came in on an F1 and they are still actively on F1 and still actively in school, right? Their F1 status is still active and valid. The spouse that's a permanent resident can just apply for them, and they can apply for a green card inside the US. If they came on a B1, B2 visa and and overstayed, right? They came in, they were supposed to stay for 6 months, they stayed, it's now been a year or two. The permanent resident cannot apply for you to get your green card inside the US. They can do the I-130. Once that's approved, you would then apply for a waiver for the fact that you overstayed your visa and you had unlawful presence in the US, and then wait for the waiver to be approved, go to the interview at the embassy, wait for that visa to be approved, and then you can come back in as a permanent resident. So that's the difference, right? If it's a US citizen, you're filing everything in the US because you came in with a legal status. If it's a permanent resident, you need to have current valid status, okay, before you file. So if you're filing today, you need to have valid status today. If your valid status ends a month after you file, that's different, right? That wouldn't affect you being able to still get your green card in the US, but you must be in valid status. You must be in valid status at the time that you file for the green card. So I hope that answers your question, Mikkel. The rest of it was cut off. So if there was more to the question, then what I was able to read, please feel free to let me know. But I hope that did answer your questions. As always, if you do have questions, please put them in the comments. If you're watching on the replay, hi, welcome. Go ahead, leave your questions in the comments as well. I do go back and respond to all of those. And if you want to schedule a strategy session with me, if you want to see if you qualify for a green card, what you need for citizenship, feel free to reach out. You can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788. And as always, if you are still watching this video and you are not subscribed to my channel, please feel free to just hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you do not miss any of my uploads or my lives. And okay, and as always, feel free to like, share this video, because we want to make sure that people are getting the right information. And as always, I am Lillian Chukura. I am the owner and attorney at Lily Legal, where we do immigration law and we do it well. Have a great